inaugural Professor of Aviation at Griffith, and the aviation element is the largest aviation unit in Australia with over 700 students. And Tim's going to talk to us today about evaluating measures to reduce corporate aviation emissions.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me, everyone. So I'll try and keep it to time. Thank you for the introduction. So I've been at Griffith University around 6 years now, came in as head of Griffith Aviation. And this paper, I've had this research in transport and climate change and then aviation and climate change for going back 10 years or so. And the university here at Griffith was keen to develop aviation emission targets. So I've had a period working with the university with some research to do that. It should come out shortly, so it's quite timely for me to kind of talk it through here. Firstly, acknowledging the country, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting and pay respect to elders past and present, to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, both here where we're meeting and those in various places online. So my background, I was originally transport research in the UK, increasingly aviation and environment focused. My increasing research theme is decarbonising the aviation industry, increasingly topical, relevant, and actually work I was doing in the UK 10, 15 years ago on aviation tax is almost could be relevant here shortly. I'm waiting for it to kind of really hit the political scene here. We'll see. My research has been interdisciplinary, which addresses contemporary real-world problems. Those two logos is work I did in the UK, large multi-university projects, one on surface trip to and from airports, the ABC project, one on adaptation resilience to climate change called FutureNet. It was looking at, I come from a behavioural perspective, doing surveys, how people respond, and I worked with some kind of transport civil engineers, looking at the kind of impact on weather on road and rail, and then some sociologists, future predictions, as well as climatologists and how that impacts. So that was from the last piece of work I was involved in before I came out here. So I'm just going to give an introduction, a bit of a literature review, the Griffith University situation, data collection, findings and implementation plan. Those three students are actually Griffith students. So in terms of Griffith Aviation, we mainly do pilot training and aviation management. We have flight training at Archerfield through flight provider Bass Air. The main headlines kind of city, I say that there's around about a third of Qantas or QantasLink pilots came through Griffith. So we're linked to a Qantas future pilot program, even with COVID and kind of cutbacks a bit. They've still got a pilot pipeline coming through. With COVID, clearly we've been hit with student numbers a bit, but we've actually grown our online student cohort. A lot of people have been stood down, have come and studying with us. So we've got that aviation background, and I link with people across the university, including wow, I've come to a few things before, and I think because I'm the program director of the Batch of Aviation Management, I do kind of sit across the business school quite well from where I am. So the aim of this paper, which I am actually presenting at a conference, an aviation conference in about a month or so, and will write up, is to reduce corporate air travel emissions using Griffith University as a case study. I'll come on to where it fits in the university. It's through the sustainability subcommittee, and it was kind of commissioned by Peter Bryant and Brendan Mackey. We consulted with university staff, a series of semi-structured interviews, and a week-long immersive digital discussion. So I don't know if anyone, it was anonymous, so I don't know whether anyone present or online took part, but it was a immersive digital week-long event last November, actually, and I'll come on to that a bit later. So, I mean, clearly it's increasingly relevant. The emissions from aviation have tripled over the last 30 years. The growth is expected to continue post-COVID whenever that bounces back. And there has been over the last 30, 40 years a growth in underlying air travel demand globally. There's been a few knockbacks with 9/11, the GFC, and SARS actually. This is going to clearly be in a bigger dip, and it will take a while to get back to pre-COVID levels arguably 24, 25, but there is that underlying growth. There's a whole range of complexities with both the technical calculation of the contribution and the policy response as well. So this work came as part of the university in their looking at net zero carbon emission and their goals. So I kind of chaired this aviation emissions reduction working group. 3 of the co-members of it, a small group, but Savini Caldera, Bojana Spasojevic, and Emma Whittlesey were all involved in that and in this paper as well. I acknowledge them on the front page. There's also 3 other working groups, campus biodiversity and sustainable development goals, who are kind of have had kind of small amounts of funding to try and push on the sustainability values and goals of the university. And I expect this work to be presented at the Sustainability Week, which is coming up mid to late September. I presented last time at it, just an introductory piece of work. So the university's got an overall target of 50% by 2030. At the start for aviation, they said 25% by 2030. It will require significant behavioural change. Clearly, it's hard to tell with post-COVID how it will bounce back. If it will bounce back is the other question. But for the university, after travel consumption, the largest source is emissions from air travel. Now, there's a whole debate of what's included and not included. So we include staff air travel in this, so it doesn't include student travel or kind of ad hoc pieces where, for argument's sake, people are doing leisure trips and then do a work thing on the site, but they pay for it personally. So there's a large debate on what you count on this. So the goal is to develop an implementation plan through consultation with the university committee, and I'll come back to that at the end. I think the challenges faced for Griffith or any university, and one of the outcomes of this work is I'm hoping to then develop in the area of general corporate emissions, and I can see links clearly to WOW and your workplace organisation and well-being, that this could be applied to other universities, but other businesses and organisations as well. I have quickly reviewed, I want to review in more detail what's happening at other universities, and certainly there's a lot coming out what you'd expect. Scandinavia, Northern Europe are kind of leading the way in this area. The challenge with Griffith, like any of us, is that core business is international students and staff and research activities, which need arguably an element of travel as part of them. There's a tyranny of distance, of the way that, unlike places like Europe, there's not a kind of train alternative for most trips. And a lot of the distances needed, certainly pre-COVID, encourage long distance air travel as well. There's always a contentious aspect of this, that there are economic and social benefits of air travel that people generally, I know it could be a hassle, but enjoy the benefits of it personally through tourism, through work benefits. And the industry's always pushed the kind of economic benefits through air travel connections. And if talking about sustainability, and I have branded myself previously as sustainable aviation, and people question, is there such a thing as sustainable aviation? And I've had for over kind of 10 years or so the debate of you're promoting aviation on one hand with one part of your work, and then you're trying to reduce it environmentally in the other strand. So there is that whole debate about, is aviation sustainable and that kind of thing as well. So it can get very contentious. So initially we had data from 2019, 25,000 flights, a lot of them return flights, so kind of individuals with 12,000. 12,500 or so. Most travel is fairly evenly split across the 4 groups, plus Griffith International has their component, plus central management corporate. So in the outcomes, we, in a sense, said there's 5 main groups of travel, the 4 academic groups, plus the centre, if I want a better phrase. Trips were 42% domestic, 58% international. Slightly higher on domestic than I'd have expected, but there's clearly a lot down to Sydney and Melbourne. Main 3 airlines dominated by Qantas, Virgin Australia, and then Singapore. So clearly the airlines and proportions will change coming out of COVID. But there's a whole debate there about frequent flyer miles and lounges and all the tie-ins with the university, which clearly had some links with some of those airlines, both corporately and individually. This is just something that I co-edited a book in 2012 on transport and climate change with a UK colleague, Lee Chapman. He's a professor of geography in Birmingham. Some of this kind of comes forward, and this is out of the conclusion chapter, which is always challenging. And then kind of we need early responses to minimise climate change costs. People can always argue that, and increasingly so, that society is running out of time to avoid dangerous climate change levels. The downturn timing is a concern, and this was written in the context of GFC. And you could repeat that now for COVID, that climate change will take a lower policy priority. There's a debate now whether that will be the case coming out of COVID. You can argue either way. There's always that hope that the impacts have been overestimated. Transport policymakers will suddenly change tack on climate change issues. There's certainly been a change. I mean, UK have just published, I've not had a chance to look at it, a decarbonisation of transport plan. You've had Joe Biden talking about climate change, and suddenly the US airlines have changed tack and talking about electric aviation and possibilities where they just weren't mentioning it at all. So you can arguably see that if the government here changed tack, you could see more from the Australian airlines, and further unexpected behavioural and technological changes. I mean, there will be technological changes. Electric aviation behaviour is changing, certainly coming out of Northern Europe with the flight shaming movement, and I've got colleagues I link with there about how that might change people travelling. You're starting to get climate change protests here as well. So I've kind of had a bit of a brief look with the team at Litch. I do want to get more into this to publish this work. Some work I did in 2010 on aviation taxes in the UK. This trust and transparency there with the government was crucial, because there was tax coming in just going to the government and not clear where it was going. So that's really a message to the university here and any organisation bringing in these kind of policies. You need a trust and transparency when you're restricting what people do. Some years ago, I worked on congestion charging plans for Edinburgh, and there was a real issue of where the money was going to go. It never was implemented, but there's always that issue of you're paying extra money. If something's taken away from you, what will happen with it? There's been an increasing focus on university air travel, coming under the spotlight, what it contributes. There's been work coming out that a lot of the emissions is done by a select few. Say, I don't know, 50% of emissions come from 2 to 5% of the world population. I have got data somewhere on that, but with the university air travel, a lot of people traveling for conferences, that has come under the spotlight. There is work about offsetting, and I've quoted a paper by Suzanne Becken and Brendan Mackey, clearly Griffith University academics, that they're keen to move away from offsetting. There is a debate hole on it, on that, and whether that actually allows guilt-free travel and the impact of it. So we're just talking about reducing it. We're not going into the offsetting debate as part of this. I've had a clear steer on that, and I do argue, I do kind of would agree with that. It's quite murky, complex to go down there. The last reference, we're starting to talk post-COVID about regional conferences, and the whole idea of having, rather than an international where everyone either travels or completely online, having a regional one where you get people in 3 different parts of the world, the US, I don't know, Europe and Australasia, whether you go, say, to Sydney and rather than internationally, people around Australasia. It's hard to see how it will fall. I mentioned earlier that I'm actually putting on some Aviation Reimagined seminars with GIFT in September, and we're trying to coordinate it with different parts of the world. So we can easily link with Europe if we have it at 3:34 in the afternoon, but it's very hard with America. And I found that trying to link with conferences and events, I can just about do some in the UK if they're at a certain time, but others forget it. So there is this kind of time difference debate, and we'll see how conferences develop. I've got 2 coming up in the next couple of months that are fully online, and how that networking side of it goes, and that social importance of networking after in the breaks and in the evenings. So the data collection effort. So we interviewed 10 staff October, November last year. I say we. Our research colleague Savindi conducted the interviews. She's kind of an expert in qualitative data collection and interviewing. The data set we sampled from was that 2019 data, but we also had 2 travel booking administrators, and then we stratified the sample according to the other 4. A series of open-ended questions exploring the background, booking experience, travel choices, and exploring these different policy initiatives which you're looking to bring in. Then from that, we sampled from that database again. We also did a couple of banner adverts out to the university population. It was quite a tough time to recruit people with all the whole R2S. We got a reasonably representative sample. I think slightly more females than males. And actually of the groups, business school was a bit underrepresented but generally fairly well represented. So Recollective is actually a Griffith tool. They've done a series of research using it. There's a couple of people in the university who are really good on it. It's basically an immersive online qualitative data collection effort. I'm predominantly quantitative in my work. All of those people, and we had 56 sign up, so all those 52 fully involved had at least 15 minutes a day. So you can come in when you want to. There's a set of tasks. It's both a series of questions they fill in, but also some open-ended kind of questions to respond to, and like a discussion board. I'm doing one in teaching at the moment, so you kind of get that discussion element to it. We had 10 moderators who kind of encouraged people and helped people take part. So as a first experience of using it, I was impressed. I was pleased with how it went. It was fascinating being involved with it, and we've got some really useful outcomes from it. So we did that in November. We wrote it up March, April. We finished. We've submitted. We've done a long research report, but we've submitted to the Sustainability Committee, and the work we've done. I'm going to present some of the findings as going up to the executive group of the university. So some of this is slightly in confidence, but I'm sure that I've told them I'm presenting here, and it should be fine. There's going to be a further consultation with the university, and I expect to speak at the Sustainability Week or be involved in the town hall or something, whether it's through me or Brendan or Peter will come through. There's already, I think one of the management slides has had mention of the target and where we're going from there. So this came from, so for both the interviews and the Recollective, first from the interviews, I can't really read the small right from here, but basically the challenges that people find from reducing air travel. One is limiting collaboration and innovation. I think the second one is limiting career growth, which is quite important for the junior staff members, particularly I think people like myself and people that are more senior that have had that career of linking out and around with international connections and really helping with career growth. And I can sense people coming in of like, well, you've had all this, it's a bit unfair, you're now taking it away from people coming through. So one of the recommendations is about focusing on those kind of more junior researchers and lecturers, of giving them possibly more of the opportunities to still travel. I think there's another challenge of overseas research, of going and doing collection, particularly in remote areas. I think health and archaeology kind of came up at different points in the work we're doing. That there's often some of it can be devolved to local data collection teams, but there is some work that will still involve that kind of travel. I've gone from, with both the data to some kind of tables and some interview insights. It is hard to go from we kind of have gone from a 40-page research report down to a journal paper, which this is taken from, and to try and get the flavour of the interview quotes and the text going through it. I may not have captured it all fully, but I feel I've certainly got some of it. I think from the interview, there is this accountability that you come back to. broad level evaluation and a targeted focus on what they're doing. And again, this challenge about being in the field, linking, is just reinforced. One, you're trying to tease out from it interesting insights of how this could be presented. And someone has given that example of university printers, where you actually know how much paper was consumed, the carbon emissions with it, and you can actually generate, as well as recognition, internal competitions to influence aviation emission reduction. So in a sense, this kind of comes out of nudge theory, which Thaler and Sunstein got a Nobel Prize in economics for it. It's kind of psychological approach where you nudge people in changing behaviour, and that printer is one example. But you could kind of say, well, your unit or group is producing this amount of emissions. What about you? You can see it in some energy bills now. People like you have got this emissions. You've got your electricity bill. People in your neighbourhood with a similar size have got this amount. So it's more of a way which I'm keen to kind of push a bit more how to develop that. So then we came to the recollective study, and we had 4 categories: travel policy, research and teaching practice, university planning procurement, and operations and IT. So policy, we were kind of teasing out the university policy and procedures, how people could respond to aviation emissions. In terms of teaching, this whole kind of blended teaching development, how people find about doing online and in class, and how that might develop. So I know that given we're an international discipline in aviation, I could get international speakers to present, to do teaching for me wherever they are around the world. There's this kind of opportunities of having that, and trying not to completely disentangle research and teaching. Online conference developments, how that may travel, excuse a pun. In terms of planning procurement, we got this from University of Lund. Actually, you've got this pre-trip approval decision tree where you have to go through a series of check boxes before you book your travel. Having an emission dashboard, visualization of where people are traveling. Enhanced carbon calculation. It's something that the university outsources that to a consultancy at the moment. So I'm keen to actually get into that a bit more and develop that more, but that was discussed in the work we're doing. I linked with a colleague in Finland who's done a lot of work on carbon calculation. Flexible working arrangements and how that may work moving forward. New technologies. I'm actually in the new N79 building now. The DEN is a digital energy node led by one of my colleagues, Cheryl Desher. It's almost going from Zoom and that kind of 2D image to actually 3D image down the track, and actually have a bit more of a feel that people are there at a conference. It reminds me, I did this ABC project quite a few years ago in the UK, and we linked with people at Leeds who are developing telepresence, which is that idea of having a booth. And we were having it rather than travel to an airport to drop people off for surface trips. You actually stayed at home and had your person you were saying goodbye at the airport in one of these booths, and you're in a booth at home. So actually you felt someone was physically present in that room. So rather than looking at, I don't know, 9 screens on a Zoom like I was yesterday and doing all that, you actually feel that you have a room where people are present. So that I can see that coming, whether it's 2 years, 5 years, we'll have to wait and see. Performance indicators, corporate rewards and awards, and that's something to sustainability awards, how to actually get that through. So that's what we tested, and we've got some useful quotes and ideas coming from that. This is that fleshed out a bit more. I'm just looking at it on the computer here. I think it's just fleshed a bit more about having the joined up 2-tiered approach on the travel policy. One thing I've not mentioned is the fair and inclusive and equitable travel practices. Now, clearly that's one of the values of Griffith that we're keen to promote. I've got a quote on that coming up, but that whole, you could look at gender, status in academia, in stage of career, if someone's got care responsibilities, that the online world gives actually people a lot more opportunities in that space. Operations and IT, I've covered much of that. One thing with teaching research I haven't mentioned is the sustainability training. There's a whole suite of training courses I'm sure many of you have done when you arrive at Griffith, and you have to do every 2 or 3 years. There is a sustainability element to it, so that we could bring more of aviation into there. And I think it's also having more of a championing within the university of online and technology, and hosting online conferences. So I'd hope that will come in due course. You could include it in staff performance, and the way people are performing in terms of what they do online or with travel. So I think this is a mix of, like before, of direct quotes and general descriptions. We anonymized participants and gave them all a 6-digit or 5-digit number, I should say. So that's where the P comes from. There was one saying that there's an opportunity to use travel booking process to incorporate awareness raising about the impact of flying. So it does give that extra point where you can nudge people. This idea of giving more equity, and clearly there's gender implications, but also caring, responsibility, people who are parents, and that idea of not being able to travel, and others have been able to advance because they've been able to network. And the COVID disruption has given people a chance to reflect on that and see moving forward in that. And I think the structural inequalities we've had in academia, how to reduce that, whether the ways forward. So that came through beyond kind of gender, but also that kind of carer element as well. So there's a whole range that would look to come back to. There is this idea about zero emissions and carbon offsetting, I should say, an idea about what is zero when you're still traveling, and then the offset, how much is that really buying off what you've done, and the whole guilt-free travel element. And we've been through this disruption, and it gives a chance to change practice, and some people see it as an opportunity, and it's been really hard. We'll come to the targets at the end, where you go from here with targets. And I think experience has been great with a lot of people with COVID conferences. Reduced fees is another element. I think the timing of, I always was conscious, the timing when we did the data collection, the timing when we produced the results, and the timing of what the university implements and when. So we've got in our implementation, we're kind of disseminating this year. The kind of next year is kind of starting the implementation, and then rolling it forward. But you're going to have a phase of people excited by online conferences and then get frustrated by it because of all the whole kind of being online all the time. I'm starting to feel it myself, and the impact of being on a video thing when you're doing the chat and all that kind of element. So that whole element of social interaction versus online, and how people might feel now from 6 months' time with further lockdowns or restrictions to travel, and how international travel might bounce back. And I think it has given people the chance to reflect and reduce unnecessary travel, was another respondent. I think it is a case that all staff will need to make some degree of behavioural change, and I think this cultural change is quite important, and a sense of responsibility. There is a feeling of kind of everyone trying to be in this together, and there's a whole top-down, bottom-up element of how the organisation would do that, and trying to get people on board. It is kind of a challenge with the whole R2S process we've been through, and what changes might happen in the future. So I'm kind of conscious of that. What I found with the aviation tax work was that people came out with ideas at this kind of event, and then they either got knocked back because they're not practically relevant, or for one reason can't be implemented. But the ideas coming through: bonus cash contribution, Escarcia days of leave, awards for the number of air travel kilometres saved, vouchers for local holiday spots, highest carbon saver of the year, recognition at annual university awards. So some of them are more feasible than others, but it's trying to that Red Collective was a place for people to kind of come out with those ideas. And it's interesting that the vouchers for local holiday spots, having done some work in the UK on the whole staycation idea, and the fact that you've got, talking to someone from Brisbane Airport yesterday, that Cairns and Longreach and the like are fully booked out at the moment. They're actually full with domestic travellers, but they're not getting the spends that they would get that international travellers do coming in. So it's interesting, that whole element of people, that their habit is changing. So we're in this kind of thing. So in terms of discussion and conclusions, we did actually have two groups coming through the data collection effort, the Recollected. There is a real group with the environmental ethos of the university, and I'm always a bit conscious that you have got a core group, environmental science people that may have taken part and pushed this further. But I think there is a wider support from staff of environmental cause relating to air travel. Certainly, a few of the senior people in the university are keen for a 50% target. We'll have to wait and see what the university comes back with on that. And naturally, there are some more resistant due to work and career-based concerns, and we acknowledge that all the way through. And there will be some necessity to travel by air. For example, specific research sites or in-person international student events. Some cultures expect the leader to be there. This brings to mind the whole thing with the Olympics and having the premier and the mayor and having to attend in person. And I've only just made that link just now, but you can see how that could easily translate in a senior manager being somewhere and everyone pointing their finger. Whether it's right or wrong is open to question, but you can see that debate coming through. This is a graph of emissions and projections. So the years at the bottom are actually, where it says 2010, it's 2010 to 2011. So it's June 2010 to 2011. So the 2010 value is the baseline here. So it's 10,400 from memory. So clearly there was kind of a bit of variation. It kind of grew rapidly to the peak 2018, 2019, and then 2019/20 had the hit because of March 2020 being effectively when travel was completely reduced, and then 2020 to 21 it's virtually zero, although there has been some domestic travel. So we're kind of in this position where the target we recommend at the start of the work was 25% by 2030. So the university overall is going for 50% by 2030. So the red line is if we say 25%. So what I've said is when we bounce back in 23, we're talking about 25% reduction on the 2010 levels, which is around about just 8,200. But then if there's a challenge to reduce by 5% every year down to 2030. So we're kind of advocating, I think, a 50% reduction, and there'll be a proposal out to staff and the executive group on those three options: 25% by 2050, 40% by 2050, and 50% by 2050. Now, quite where the blue line will hit 21, 22, and 22, 23, it's just clearly hard to tell. And then when you get some normality, but there is the idea that we should actually try and reduce from the new normal, although that phrase is overused. So we kind of have some recommendations coming in that work. The first recommendation of the 6 was actually the targets. The second one is a program of cultural change and awareness raising about the impact of flying. To foster technologically advanced teaching and research practice. There's already an element of this going on already, clearly, but I think championing best practice, actually having some experts in-house about hosting international conferences. The whole tools to collect travel-related data and monitor aviation emissions, carbon calculator, emissions impact dashboard, flight data management, and visualization of information. Now, they're all things that need a bit of work, but there are teams around the university or that could, and the proposal is to bring a lot of them in to help with this. Staff justification of their travel requests, so that there's more of a approach there. And I think there is a targeted approach needed, and particularly institutional barriers to change. And I think in some pockets of the university, there may be more challenges than others, particularly how we've got a whole suite of disciplines around the university, and there could be some where there is just more of a need to go back to physical conferences. It's just hard to see. My goal would be to have 5 underarching targets across the 4 groups in the centre, and then that would filter down, and whether the responsibility comes to the PVC or a central person or the head of school centres, and it's probably, I think it will be devolved down to the centres will have that, and whether you offset that from within a different unit, it's hard to see. This is just a quick, simple Excel modelling that I've done on if you're trying to reduce 5% per year. That approach from 2024, I think, to 2030, 5% a year. I just looked at different. If you reduced that 5%, 20% short haul and 80% long haul versus 80% short haul and 20% long haul. So it just shows the higher proportion clearly with long haul, and you need just the impact of those two and what that would mean for the number of flights coming down on short haul versus long haul. So whether the benefits will come more from short haul or long haul, we still don't know. But it's actually getting more of an accurate calculation, and people seeing the difference between the impacts of those 2 types of trips. So you could get short haul less of an impact, but easier to change, arguably. We'll have to wait and see the balance between doing online business meetings between Sydney and Melbourne versus the international conferences. So the next steps, finalise the implementation plan with actions. We've got a neat 1-page diagram. We've got a kind of table of options with different impacts. We're going to consult back to the wider university community over the next month or 2. Keen to publish academic work. One of my next tasks is review the aviation emission calculation methodology to get that more accurate. The university's got consultants who do that for them at the moment. I just want to give a bit of a review of that. I've got a couple of academic colleagues internationally that their expertise on carbon calculation, so I'm keen to look at that. So that's where we're at with it. Thank you very much for your time and attention. It's been great for me to go through this process, and interested to hear some feedback.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.